Why don't we just negotiate with Russia? For the sake of peace? There are two questions these people need to ask themselves. The first question is, what do they want to negotiate about? Who gets what? And explain why. If the negotiation involves Russia's withdrawal of troops from Ukraine, Russia won't agree. The negotiation fails. If the negotiation involves Ukraine giving some of its land to Russia, Ukraine won't agree. And congratulations, you just rewarded Russia for its military aggression. You see, these people talk about peace, saving lives and all, but they insist Ukraine has to be the one giving all the concessions to Russia. They don't really care about Ukrainian people living on the land that is currently occupied or being bombarded by Russia. The second question is, why would Russia adhere to this new agreement when Russia has broken numerous agreements since the 1990s? During the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, ex-Soviet countries like Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. Kinda ironic when Russia signed this treaty, but is the one violating it by invading Ukraine. There is also the 1997 Russian-Ukrainian Friendship Treaty, which states that these two countries should not invade each other. So if Russia do break this new agreement, would there be any real consequences for Russia? Of course not. The truth of the matter is, there are few Ukrainians supporting the idea of negotiating with Russia because firstly, Russia doesn't honor its agreements, and secondly, Russia would gladly use this ceasefire to regroup and reorganize and conveniently start another war a few years later. We know this because Russia has done this in Chechnya and Georgia.
Треба визнати очевидний факт. Із цим керівником Росії, який не має майбутнього, не може бути і діалогу. Він сам відкинув діалог, попри всі наші намагання домовитись про мир протягом років.
What about NATO expansion? This is all NATO's fault.
NATO didn't invade Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine. You see these troops? These are Russian troops in Ukraine, not NATO. This is pretty obvious to anyone with a brain. But Russian propagandists need to convince people that somehow NATO made Russia invade Ukraine. Yeah, try telling people that France or Poland somehow made Nazi Germany invade them. And regarding NATO promising not expanding eastwards, no such treaty exists. Also, countries willingly apply to join NATO, they certainly are not forced to do so. In fact, even Putin himself wanted to join NATO.
Россия – это часть европейской культуры. И я не представляю себе своей собственной страны в отрыве от Европы и от так называемого, как мы часто говорим, цивилизованного мира. Поэтому с трудом представляю себе и НАТО в качестве врага.
В конце концов, Россия, как вы думаете, Россия, наверное, могла бы вступить в НАТО?
Почему нет?
We should be spending the money to solve poverty, homelessness, healthcare,
blah blah blah. For some reason, people seem to think that countries are airdropping piles of cash to Ukraine. In reality, the amount of money you see are mostly in the form of military equipment. Many of this military equipment and ammunition have already been paid for by the government decades ago. They do have expiry dates, and in some cases, it would cost much more for them to be properly disposed of or to be kept in storage. Now try explaining to people how giving 155mm artillery rounds to the poor would help their situation.
Никто, говорите, не объяснил, что современный мир сложен, многообразен, быстро развивается, возобновляемых источников энергии. Надо только исходить из реалий.
These social problems exist even before the war in Ukraine. It certainly wasn't caused by the Ukraine war. Also, the Pentagon overestimated the value of these weapons being sent to Ukraine. Regardless, the amount of military aid provided to Ukraine by countries like the United States only accounts for 0.3% of its GDP. And do you know how much the US government spends on social security and healthcare? So calls to cut military aid to Ukraine are essentially calls for Ukraine to surrender, which is basically Russia's demand.
But Ukraine bombed Donbas for 8 years.
No. Ukraine hasn't been bombing Donbas for 8 years, and most of the violations of the ceasefire agreements were from the Russian side. According to the United Nations data, 90% of the civilian casualties were recorded in 2014 and 2015. And in 2021, there were only 25 casualties. And these casualties also include those caused by landmines.
Ukraine is losing. Russia has infinite resources.
These people are basically living in fantasy world. They have no idea how war works, or have no idea how to read a map. This is how the map looked at the start of Russia's invasion. This is how the map looked 1 year later. It is as if the planning and execution of military operations requires time. And guess what? The mighty Russian Empire lost to Japan. The very powerful Soviet Union invaded Finland and failed. The invincible USSR invaded Afghanistan and also failed. It is as if the size of a country has little to do with the proficiency of its military. When you put thousands of drunk conscripts on the front with no proper equipment, supplies, and ammo, many of them would simply surrender. I'm not even gonna entertain all the US-funded biolabs, genetically modified mosquitoes killing Russian people, Ukrainian Nazi bullshit, because it's a complete waste of my time. Try explaining to people the earth is round. Given organizations like Code Pink do have close ties to China, I wonder why they would be spreading Russian propaganda. Not everyone pushing these ideas are paid by Russia, but most of them are probably uneducated.